Thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope that you've been having a great spooky evening so far. Welcome to my talk, Oh No, Tech Bro, the toolkit that you shouldn't need. My name is Elise and I've been a software engineer for 5 years. I actually attended You Got This in person a few years ago back as a junior developer, so I'm very happy to be talking here today. So what should you expect from this? I've split the toolkit into two. The first half will focus on bigger picture stuff, things like hiring and culture. That bit will be kind of more actionable. In particular, anyone here with executive power or involved in hiring, definitely listen up to that half. But there'll also be plenty of bits for any juniors not yet involved in that side of things. And then the second half will be honing in on individuals, case-by-case personalities, and coping strategies on how to defeat them. As you can see, I've named these the world and the character classes because there's nothing like dealing with real-world problems like pretending you're in a video game. Though before I go any further, I really want to say that one of my least favorite topics is women in tech, shortly behind feigning interest in NFTs, because I genuinely wish toolkits like this did not have to exist. But whatever gender you are and whatever job title you have, you can definitely deploy at least one thing from this talk today, which will decrease the likelihood of this same talk next year. So we can dive into the context now. Meet Elon the ghost. His name is Elon, but I swear I just like the name and he's not based on anyone in real life. Now, Elon is a tech bro in that he works in tech, obviously. He leans hard into stereotypically masculine traits and rather than being a social reject of sorts, is often in a position of prestige and may see himself as a leader or even as a visionary. So it's no surprise that business cultures like tech and finance that reward young, brash, hyper-competitive individuals become a paradise for the tech bro. It makes sense that the highest paying roles in the marketplace is where you find people with ego and prestige and entitlement flocking. So in turn, these do become the hardest industries for women to break into and for women to remain in. One study actually showed that college-age women tended to steer clear of engineering and computer science degrees because they thought they had to be brilliant, not just hardworking, but brilliant to succeed, a consideration that doesn't seem to deter young men, and certainly not Elon the ghost here. Now, I'm sure that there are plenty of lovely, supportive, and smart developers here today who do not identify with Elon the ghost, but may still be part of this culture and certainly might benefit from it. So do really try and challenge yourself throughout this because chipping away at bro culture will benefit everyone involved. Okay, so a stance I completely sympathize with is, okay, there's still a lot of work to be done, but why should I have to spend my time trying to fix a system that I didn't even create? Even worse for many of us, a system that hurts me specifically. This is not my problem. Well, my answer to that is that it's just not fair. That being said, I hope things are moving in the right direction and you specifically don't actually have to try and fix anything. There are bits of this toolkit that are purely coping mechanisms, and there are also bits that require action and that seek change. But the bottom line is, at the very least, if you are a woman managing to stay in tech despite the problems, this still puts you in a position of change because tech, as I said, is one of the hardest industries to remain in as a woman. So it's really, really important that we stick with it. And others of you might be thinking, well, lots of people, and importantly, big corporations are talking about diversity these days, which is really true on some level. However, companies love woke washing, which is cashing in on looking progressive, but not actually changing. We've seen it during Pride Month, and we've seen it with anti-sexist campaigns like Nike's Here on the Left with Serena Williams, which was shortly followed by the news that Nike wouldn't even give one of their sponsored athletes paid maternity leave. The same thing can sadly happen when tech companies, big or small, say that they are striving for diversity, but still engage with and maintain cultures that favor these hyper-masculine traits. And it all becomes a bit of a tech bro party. My point is, in my opinion, it is too easy to fake change. And until real change comes, we first need to cope so that we don't drop out. And secondly, if we have it in us, cause some change too. Oh, what's that noise? Hang on, guys. Elon is calling me. Elon, you're on the call and you're worried that disturbing the current order could hinder your dreams of a financially successful company. Well, okay, I understand, but I have good news. All of the research shows that companies perform better without bro culture. Diverse teams build better products and run more financially successful companies. Elon, I can now see, is nodding, but wants to say that he's never personally seen bro culture and it's hashtag not all devs. Now, this doesn't actually mean that Elon is a bad person. He may well wholeheartedly believe that bro culture isn't rife, but listen to this. 72% of women in tech report working in a company where bro culture is pervasive, but only 41% of men in tech said the same. This is clearly just a difference in perception. Now, this is an age-old issue that it is really, really hard for people in positions of power or those not negatively affected to recognize problems within the dominant culture. This is nothing new. So if you don't think you've seen it, be open to the idea that you perhaps find it a little bit harder to spot, and then ask yourself why. All right, now that Elon is an ally, we can move on to the toolkit itself. Our first point is higher degreeless. Now, some argue that this means lowering the bar. That is not what this is doing. You can still test whether someone is a logical person, a problem solver, a good communicator, a great self-teacher without a strong coding background. This is not about hiring women or underrepresented groups for the sake of it. Now, a woman does not apply to be a dev at a company with the intention of being a diversity hire. She just wants to build cool shit, watch failing code start to run, solve problems, and get on with it like the rest of us. Now, if you're not part of the hiring process, you still can encourage your company to hire less people relying on nepotism, affiliations, conformity, and entitlement. Also, you can be mindful with referrals. If you're a developer who is underrepresented, refer a friend who is too. If you taught yourself to code through YouTube videos, convince a friend from a completely different background to try it out. Don't pick based on qualifications, pick based on their problem-solving ability and approach. In fact, since it's Halloween, I'd like to quickly mourn the dead careers of the various people that I've seen sucked into the coding cult. None of them had STEM degrees, but all of them are now brilliant coders. Some just had to be told that it was possible and normal to learn late. I've personally killed the careers of a 32-year-old who previously did public relations, a 24-year-old language graduate who could speak French, Russian, Italian, English, and she's now speaking JavaScript, a champion female boxer, and a 28-year-old woman who was working in the arts and now on her second promotion at a tech startup. Speaking of which, startups are actually the worst offenders for bro networks, despite sometimes getting a rep for being kind of more progressive than the bigger, more powerful corporations. We've all seen it. Two guys, best friends, they create a startup. They may well have genuine, sincere intentions to eventually cultivate a mid-sized company with diversity and a brilliant culture. The key word there, though, is eventually. It seems common sense to hire a few friends who may well be qualified and a great culture fit, but suddenly there's 15 white guys on the website staff page, no women are applying, and the narrative of, well, we don't get any female applicants remains validated, all whilst Boys Club can continue happily. So hiring a skewed demographic of men who maybe mirror the kind of go-getters who started the company, they're inadvertently reinforcing this bro culture cycle. We also need to remember who is investing in startups, because 93% of venture capitalists are men, and men tend to back men. Now, two quick final notes about hiring. You can literally Google gender-neutral language tools to edit your job adverts. The results are awesome and will increase skill diversity through the door. And finally, consider blind resumes where name and gender are hidden from those reviewing the CVs. Okay, so we've covered hiring, and we absolutely should not stop there. And this is all too often where companies do stop. What about the next step, which is interviews? Again, for those involved with interviewing decisions, have a woman on the interview panel. Now, a really, really important point on this, if you don't have many women to choose from and you're bringing in the same ones each time, bear in mind that this takes a disproportionate amount of their time away from them, which they could be spending coding like their male counterparts. Don't just praise them for this. Reward and compensate them for this. Now, if you're a junior applying to dev jobs, you want to make sure that you're entering a non-toxic, non-sexist workplace that doesn't have a facade of respect at the start, but actually has no real progression for underrepresented employees. So make progression a key part of discussion during interviews, and importantly, have them back it up with proof. You could even ask to speak to people in the company, which brings me to my next point, which is vocal quitting. So toxic culture costs the UK economy £23 billion a year. So it's really, really worth it for companies to take seriously and understand where their failings are. A huge percentage of women who have quit tech complain that they were excluded from the kind of informal buddy networks that benefit male peers, but they didn't mention this to the employer. If you quit a job or are thinking about quitting, be vocal about why. On the flip side, ask women why they're quitting, and importantly, then believe them. Now, it's really brave to say these things and to give honest feedback. I really, really get it. But if you get pushback or are made to feel like you've made a fuss, question why. Ask your developer friends how easy those conversations might be in their organization, because you deserve to be somewhere where they facilitate this kind of culture feedback. And trust me, the teams who do will do a lot better. Finally, in terms of the bigger picture stuff, we've got unconscious bias training, which are workshops literally designed to get people aware of their unconscious bias. Now, this does have mixed reviews because, as you can imagine, forcing people into a room for uncomfortable inward reflection can cause defensiveness and alienation, in turn making them sadly double down on problematic views. However, I do think it can be really helpful for the vast proportion of well-meaning employees. So if you're a junior who hasn't seen this at your company, it is well worth discussing. And on this note of unconscious bias, we come back to the fact that maybe Elon isn't even a bad ghost after all. Maybe he's been way too deep in bro culture and never needed to challenge his views. He had enough other Elon ghost developers around him, studied alongside them. No doubt he's built great things with them, bonded over their similarities, and probably excelled, right? All to give the illusion that his way, his method, and his belief system even is the best way of doing the job. Because again, age-old issue here, the culture is upheld by Elon being blinded to the fact that there's a whole line of people who look very different to him and act very different to him, working harder than him to generate the same opportunities that he had. Okay, we're going to move on to the second half of the toolkit. Now, if I lost anyone in that first half, now's your time to come back in. I appreciate the first half was more focused on changing processes rather than day-to-day life. So come back if you want to focus on the personalities, close your Twitter tab and chime back in, because there is some combat coming up. So despite there being some genuine baddies around, a lot of difficult behavior is actually just because someone's uneducated and insecure rather than, excuse the pun, mean-spirited. The best thing that we can do is understand why people behave the way they do and figure out their mortal weakness. Sometimes contacting your manager should not be the first thing you do when someone's being tricky. So try these nightmare navigation combat skills first. On to our first monster. First up, we have the solo dictator. Now, they reject any idea that does not come from them, and they don't see the benefits of collaboration, or they don't think it's worth doing. Okay, so this character may have developed that approach due to bad experiences with collaboration in the past. A really common backstory for people like this is that there was a time that they didn't have control over a project and unjust criticism fell on them, which has now led to them wanting to force their way and take control. The solution here is to create good new experiences of collaboration, show them that collaboration doesn't need to be scary, and help build respect. Help them trust that working with you is safe and try not to see them as the enemy, despite me literally presenting them here as the enemy. Next, we have the blamer. They rarely acknowledge or apologize for their own mistakes and are quick to blame people for theirs. They may even stretch the truth to convince others that their version of events is accurate. Really bad ones may use the fact that you're a junior as a tool to throw you under the bus for their own mistakes. The solution here is the mantra, process, not people, which means when something goes wrong, the entire team should really be talking about it with a focus of the processes that went wrong. When the blamer begins to blame, try redirecting their attention from blame towards facts that are verifiable. Also, to lead by example, learn how to be effective at owning up to your own mistakes in the right way. Don't over-apologize, don't over-explain. Try to remove as much emotion from it as possible, and remember that mistakes are part of the job. You are still a good developer if you make a mistake, especially if you identify why and communicate this to the wider team. Even better if it highlights, for example, that some documentation was perhaps outdated. Finally, if you do mess up, remember to take a deep breath and chill. It is really not the end of the world if you break something. Okay, we now have the passive aggressor. These ones are really tricky because they can be hard to spot to management, but they can do real damage one-to-one. They may act friendly and fine, but then even do things to sabotage the work or performance of others. It's hard to prove passive aggression because the words they use may seem positive or neutral, but you feel as though they're saying something negative. The way to handle this is to firstly avoid reciprocating the passive aggressiveness. As you can see, I've achieved this here by directly pointing the flames at the passive aggressor's face and neck, so it's very hard to miss. But honestly, again, lead by example and confront problems with them out in the open. And remember to use tact and good timing with this. Secondly, express interest in their true feelings and let them feel heard. Often people being passive aggressive are just not comfortable with being direct. Okay, we're now going to move on to the final boss, who could even be your actual boss, come to think of it. The narcissists have a pattern of entitlement, need for admiration, lack of empathy, and expecting unearned high praise, regardless of their actual effort or accomplishment. Now, they may be disliked due to this, but also due to some of the things that we discussed earlier around tech bro culture and how it maintains itself, this person could also be really admired by many co-workers. They may be incredibly charismatic and their confidence mistaken for talent, which can be really, really frustrating. Now, remember, this bit of advice is for day-to-day coping with these characters rather than actions to change the system. So this is going to be a little bit controversial, but if you're having trouble with one of these monsters, consider using flattery if it gets the job done. I know it's a really weird attack move, but you can reframe tasks that you want them to do as beneficial to them or in need of their big, big brain. They'll only want to do things that help themselves, not others. So hype up that boring documentation task and act like it's for geniuses' grasps only. And then, importantly, praise, praise, praise when they do it and publicly. It's painful, but it does work. All right, that brings me to the end of my Tech Bro Toolkit. I hope you found it helpful in some way. This was actually my first ever talk, so thank you for being such a lovely audience. And if you don't get your question answered, I've got a Twitter that I made a couple of weeks ago just for this, so feel free to contact me on there. Thank you very much.